By the way, yesterday at the beginning, I couldn't take photos very well because so you taking photos.
Did I take photos?
Yes.
Here?
Yeah, the slides.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
the beginning of the slides.
Yeah.
At some point, you should make the slides too.
I will, but I'm pretty sure they're gonna just share over the presentation. Because I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with other view, they took the device out. Decided to see somewhere a little bit more relevant to the others.
Right.
And then like the inducements,
I really want to read all those papers. Biodiversity patterns with, zero stage.
I really concentrate.
Yeah.
Especially
Just a short, as I said, we started 9:10. Play a little bit with the lights, it seems. We have a draft statement out there if someone didn't recognize or didn't know. You can submit your comments in writing or you can drop me an email if you have any comment on this draft statement. We don't require people to sign up, so it's not like a sign-up document or whatever. It's going to be a statement coming out from the conference organizers. But we appreciate if you have any useful comments to add. I don't promise that we consider all the comments in the final version, but we will consider at least during the drafting process. And there are a few printed copies there. We hope that this document will be finalized in over the week and then we can come out with the final version on early next week. Basically send it to the Commission and to the Hungarian government. It has two different parts, one for the EU and one for the my government, so to say, or our government here in Hungary. Carl, you promised to start with a joke.
No. When the right time is, yes.
Yeah.
What's that?
Okay, we give it 1 more minute and we start, okay? Yeah.
No joke. No joke.
Yeah. And my colleagues, they listen for certain websites. Beginning of next week.
Well, actually, starting a presentation with a joke is a very risky undertaking.
Yes, don't do it.
No, I don't. It works in some countries. In some countries, I found out it's actually really dangerous. The place in Germany, you need to make sure you got a connection with the audience before you do any kind of a joke. Yeah? In Italy, it's much easier. In Sweden, it's much easier. Yeah? Okay, Peter, you're the first presentation. Is that correct? Okay. So I think we should start. This day is going to be more devoted to the various pieces of legislation related to forests, and some of them are sort of really important. We've seen yesterday in the first presentation from Mario that there is any amount of legislation that is connected to forests, and then we can actually see how much forests play an important role in just about everything. Climate, nature conservation, birds and habitats directive, energy, and so on. So first speaker was Peter Huhn from the Hungarian Ecological Research Center, and you're going to sort of give us a bit of an insight of the key recommendations that came out of an interesting conference, Bottoms Up. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I am Peter Odor, and I'm working here in Hungary in the Center for Ecological Research. I'm a forest ecologist, but today I won't focus maybe on my research or the research of our research group, but I would like to speak about the results of a relatively large consortium, which is based on a cost project, the name Bottoms Up, and focused on multi-taxon forest biodiversity. And the leader and the head of the project was Sabina Burrascano from the Sapienza University of Rome, and she prepared mainly the basic of these slides. The cost project is not a classical research project. You cannot employ people on that. You cannot pay for custom members for research. It is mainly for collaboration. So it's paid for workshops, data sharing, different social activities. So it's very good if the members has own IDs and own data and others for common things. And based on the collaboration, you can upgrade a bit the level of the local studies. So it was our motivation. And another motivation is the forest policy in Europe, which if you see the different forest policy documents, biodiversity is always a keyword, a buzzword. Although sometimes I have the feeling that, but sometimes we really don't have enough knowledge concerning real forest biodiversity. If you see for example, the forest strategy, it is stated that we have to protect the old growth and primary forest, planting many trees. Very important, the sustainable forest management for the future, and of course the monitoring. But if we see behind the statements, as we see yesterday, that we don't know exactly how much old growth forest we have. Some of them are not marked. Also, the definition is sometimes not clear. We don't know what is the effect if we increase the forest cover with plantations for biodiversity. Also, when you speak about sustainable forest management of different way, we need knowledge what is the effect of different management types on forest biodiversity. And if we are speaking about monitoring, we are monitorized many structural elements, but we don't know exactly how it is connected directly to biodiversity, the richness and the composition of different organism groups. If we see the biodiversity strategy, we can see that we want to stricter the protection of old growth forest. Yeah, the same statements. And also if we see the future, for example, the logging activity, which is increased in Europe, based on this review of the Joint Research Center, we can see that most of the activities which eliminate the logging residuals has a negative effect for biodiversity, especially if we eliminate coarse woody debris. Only some fine woody debris we could have a threshold that we can survive. And also, if we look in the plantation, if we change the different type of lands to new plantation forests, if you are planting on grasslands, or if you are changing the recently semi-natural forest or natural forest, it has an absolutely negative effect. Practically, we have a positive effect for biodiversity, only the afforestation of some type of grass croplands. But it also depends which is the forest that you are planting. So, to be short, in the strategies, we have many statements connected to management, protection, and different actions, but we not exactly know what is the effect of these different actions to the real biodiversity. If we see the biodiversity indicators, which is now legally collected based on the different forest inventories, we have 10 indicators for forest biodiversity, but from these indicators we have only 2 which is directly connected to the species, like the common forest bird species and the threatened forest species. All of the others are landscape scale or stand scale structural or landscape level indicators. And we are not really tested still the effect of these indicators. And also, if we are looking forward to the forest monitoring law, if we are using mainly remote sensing analysis and some kind of inventories also focus mainly on forest structure. So the real direct biodiversity monitoring is I think very far. So the motivation was that there are many studies in Europe connected to multi-taxon forest biodiversity and connection to forest management and forest structure and other things. So in this project, we want to invite all of the researchers and research groups who has this kind of data, and this is the chair. I was the vice chair, and we have many collaborators. And the first task was that we would like to merge all data. We would make a common platform when we have data for biodiversity, data from different organism groups, and also data from forest structure, or forest management, and other background factors. So we want to make a database and a platform in a European scale for these multi-taxon biodiversity studies. Based on these studies, we want to make a network for the forest monitoring sites which are already existing. We want to share the protocols or the methods of the different studies. Another part which was my personally was mainly involved is also the collection of forest forest manipulation experiments when the response variables was different kind of biodiversity variables. And of course, based on this database, we want to make some analysis for the relationship between biodiversity, structure, and management, and improve and test the indicators that we already use for forest biodiversity. And of course, at the end, we wanted to make some policy recommendations based on this study. It was a relatively big consortium. We had many involving 300 scientists, and of course the activity was mainly networking and collaboration. So we had meetings on work package level and action level. Of course, we have many online meetings because it was in the middle of the COVID during this project. It was very important. We kept training schools for students and young researchers, mainly for methodological parts. And it was also important that we have this kind of short-term scientific missions when we have the possibility that somebody from one research group go to another one and spend 1 month or a couple of weeks for a targeted work. The first goal was this platform. In that case, we not only collect IDs and metadata, we directly put together the raw data, all of the species records, tree records, everything to a very big database. It was a huge work. And now we have a database with 3,600 sampling units, all of Europe. We have 34 individual research projects or studies which put together the data, and you can see many more than 300,000 species records. How this database looks like. Of course, each of the records has a plot ID. This is the main basis, the sampling units, which on a higher level can be on stands, which are sometimes in one homogeneous stand you have more plots. And the most important was the site ID. It's a geographical region when one project is focused practically. And from these plots we collected the standing tree data, practically DBH tree species and different tree level data for the lying and standing deadwood, and also on plot level, basically species data. The inclusion category was, it's important, we collected that project which has this time structural data, and so we focused on multi-taxon biodiversity, so we collected project which studied minimum 3 taxa, including fungi or animals, so it's not a vegetation database, it's a multi-taxon database. The first task that we first describe the structure of this data and the representativity. For example, you can see there are more than 30 organism groups, but if you see which are the organism groups you have enough data for some kind of analysis, it is 3: vascular plants, bryophytes, birds, lichens, fungi, and beetles, mainly suboxylic beetles and ground beetles. If you see the representativity for different forest types, the blue bars show the area of the forest type in Europe, while the green one is the proportion in the database. You can see that researchers like very much the beech forest. So beech forests are oversampled, and also mesophytic deciduous forest. We have much less data from the Mediterranean forest, the evergreen Mediterranean forest, and also from the riparian forest, plains, different kind of wetlands. The main management types are quite well represented except copies. In our website, you can filter the database and you can see many metadata and representativity for this database. And of course, the first step was that we fix the conditions of the using this database. So fix what is the question of authorship and what is the rules for that you can use this database. So we try to make a win-win situation for everybody who is involved. Because we have many studies, it's also a first view that you can see the methodology. And we published a paper and also make a handbook that which are the most common methodology that the different researchers use for different inventories for different taxa, and try to generalize this methodology. And we made recommendations for a more intensive and a more extensive sampling if somebody in the future would like to do this kind of multi-taxon biodiversity research. It was another interesting thing that we had to harmonize the terms. This was mainly biodiversity data collected by ecologists and biodiversity experts, and sometimes the definitions and the description of the management of the forest types, the forest structure was a bit fuzzy. So if you see, sometimes we don't have real information from the management. And if you would like to analyze the effect of management or the effect of structure for this data, you need a more or less standard terminology that. So we have to harmonize that. It has two ways, a top-down and a bottom-up way. First, we take all of the papers which was published from the individual studies and try to extract the management descriptions. From the other way, we asked all of the participants and the custodians to describe which was the management type, which was the last intervention, and so on. And here you can see that this was the most representative management type: shelterwood forestry system, selection cutting, clear cutting, copies, and clear cutting with retention, and so on. And based on this harmonization, we can go for the analysis part. Other methodological importance, which is also possible with this database, to see what is the necessary sampling intensity for these different organism groups for representativity. So we calculated it for species richness and species composition, studying the effect of sample size for this interpolation curve as the saturation of the species richness, and also similarly for species composition, we studied the variance of the species composition and tried to calculate what is the minimum sample size within a site, how many plots you need for different forest types and different organism groups, or within a forest type, how many sites you need to reach this kind of representativity. And you can see that it's very different for some organism groups, like fungi need much higher sampling intensity for a real good data than, for example, for birds or bryophytes. It's also, these graphs show this connection with the observed number of the sample and the necessary. So this part of the graph is undersampled for species richness or composition. This is well sampled, and you can see that if you see the organism groups, that mainly for fungi, beetles, vascular plants, and epiphytic lichens, the currently existing database is usually below the threshold of a good representativity. Another goal was a coordinated network of manipulation experiments. In these experiments, we collected the experiments and the researchers made some intervention for the forest structure, make different type of cuttings for anything, and the response variable was multitaxon biodiversity. There was about 30 experiments in Europe for this study, and here we published first which is the representative, which type of experiments we have. You can see that the main intervention was different type of cutting, thinning, gap cutting, clear cutting, retention tree cutting, and sometimes floor manipulation. And always they have, of course, a control. The control is in most cases a closed managed forest. There are many research focusing on deadwood or habitat tree manipulation. There are much less the effect of herbivores, and there are some individual studies for burning, water manipulation, or forest floor manipulation. Of course, very difficult to generalize results from the individual experiments because all of them have different treatments and so on. But we can try to do it for the thinning and gap cutting inventories, and you can see that the zero is the closed forest, and another side is the effect of biodiversity of gap cutting and thinning. And you can see that mainly gap cutting has a positive effect for different organism groups, for vascular plants, saprophytic beetles, and fungi. For the forest understory, the vascular plant composition, we studied in this database the functional diversity and the functional redundancy using plant height, seed mass, and leaf structure as a trait, and compared the functional diversity, for example, of different forestry systems. And you can see that comparing to the zero is the unmanaged forest, so this was the reference. And comparing to unmanaged forest, the simple clear cutting and copacetic standard significantly reduce the functional diversity and usually increase the functional redundancy. If we put these three factors, redundancy and diversity, functional diversity and redundancy together, and species diversity, the dominance is the opposite of the diversity, the selection cutting was very similar to the unmanaged forest, clear cutting with retention and shelter would have a bit lower diversity and lower functional diversity. And so the clear cutting, the simple clear cutting is very far usually from this unmanaged and this part. Also, we try to do some analysis for the thresholds of different important structural variables like deadwood. So we try to define the important threshold for lying deadwood and standing deadwood for different organism groups and also for multi-diversity, and we resulted that this threshold, which when you reach good or acceptable diversity, is about 70-60 cubic meter per hectare in the managed forest. Another important task was testing the recently existing biodiversity indicators of the EU. So these are the biodiversity indicators that we are collecting, and we test the correlation for the biodiversity of different organism groups. And you can see there are some good indicators and there are some bad or neutral indicators. indicators. The good indicators are tree species richness, 4 organism groups correlated very strongly with this one. Also, deadwood is correlated very well with birds, lichens, fungi, and bryophytes. And probably this was the 2 best. It's very interesting that sometimes vascular plants and sometimes birds has negative correlation with some of the biodiversity indicators. Sometimes vascular plants diversity is more respond positively to disturbance and human intensity, management intensity. And also, it's not on the table, but sometimes a combination of these indicators has much better response in the models than the single ones. We have, of course, it was a 5 years old, 4 years old project. So the main results was the contribution and the building of this database. So we have many preliminary results. You can see that most of the publications still under review, and still we have very possibility to analyze this data. So I think this work is not finished, but it was very important to do some recommendation. So we made a recommendation for forest monitoring and policy paper for forest monitoring and sustainable forest biodiversity based on this individual research, and all of them is of course available on the website of the project. This was the core group of the project, and there was many collaborators, and I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Before we move on, Peter, I just have one short question, and that is, I have the feeling sometimes there are 2 different academic worlds. The one that you have been describing is really trying to understand the ecosystem forest, and I don't really know how much we actually know about the forest ecosystem, despite the fact that it actually is the most dominant terrestrial ecosystem that we have. On the other side, you got the academia that is primarily concerned with maximizing the volume of wood that can be extracted within a given time. Can you, with your research, yesterday we also had this question, science needs to speak up. And with science, it actually really means kind of people who are doing this kind of research. Do you have the feeling that you are impacting the real world of forest management with your research?
I think yes. In my research, especially Hungary, I focus in mainly the effect of forest management on biodiversity with different experiments and other tasks. And I work together very intensively with foresters, also with nature conservationists, but also with foresters. It's very important the increasing the wildlife and the protection of primary forests. But 95% of the European forests are managed, and they will be managed. In most of the European countries, or many of them, conservation is integrated to forest management. So it's a very important task to harmonize the forest management. One thing is the forestry system. It's very important, but very similarly important to keep enough residuals for biodiversity independently from forestry systems. And I think I am quite strong collaboration with foresters, and I have a positive feedback, but the thinking is changing slowly. Forestry is a slow profession, but it's changing very.
Okay, I hope it takes them faster than a tree needs to grow. That's 60 years ago. Okay, thank you. Mary, quick one.
That was.
I think so.
That was an astonishingly good presentation of an astonishing project, really fantastic. I wondered if you could comment on sort of qualitatively the value of biodiversity in and of itself. You mentioned it's like mentioned 73 times in the document, and to me it seems like biodiversity has taken on this value unto itself as just a value, but that needs to be promoted at all costs. But sometimes, like, you saw higher biodiversity in disturbed systems, which isn't surprising because you have a multiplicity of different habitat types. But if those kinds of systems only arise because of human intervention, is that really, like, what's the value of managing for biodiversity? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Mika, can you give a short answer?
Sure, yeah, very short. You're pointing a very important question. What is the best measurable variables for biodiversity? The most simple one is species richness, but it's very often misleading. Like for vascular plants, species richness can increase, but the species are completely different. So if you are really want to value biodiversity, you have to go back to the reference, the natural sites, the primary forest, and comparing that as a reference and
Right.
comparing
And they
everything.
might not be that biodiverse. Some of
Yeah,
those
yeah.
natural sites might not be that
Yeah,
biodiverse.
yeah, exactly. And also you have to use the species composition, the traits, and the qualitative, not only the species richness. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next one. Jan Andersson from Sweden, case study from Sweden, from the organization Save the Forest.
Thank you.
Stage is yours, John.
Thank you. I can use that one. That's fine. Yeah, there we are.
And before you start, sorry, just, and I didn't have to do yet, try to go back to the first.
Yeah.
We are equally important, and thank you very much for all of you to come here, but we have, we don't really often welcome a member of the European Parliament, so I would like to welcome Mika Rizek. So if anyone has a question during the day, a coffee break about policy making, probably you can answer the questions. Thanks, Mika, to come.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This actually started with me just as being told one day on LinkedIn that because I'm here, happen to be here now this week, I could come and have this presentation and say, yeah, you can come. And I did. So I'm really happy to be here. I've been here before, and I love this town. It's really wonderful. Okay, let's start. So I will be talking about the project called Forest Monitor, actually in Swedish called Skogsmonitor. It means the same thing. We are trying to monitor Swedish forests. And it is me, and we now have recently hired a guy who is also working together with me with remote sensing. And then we have Victor Savage. I will stand it with close to this. I will try to. Sorry.
That's better, yeah.
That's much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go on. And we have this pointer here.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the pointing button? Oh, there. Thank you. So what we are actually doing is to do retrospective analysis of the forest landscape. And I made this example this week. I was sitting at home thinking about how to visualize what is actually the problem with our forest landscape in Sweden. We have much more of remaining old growth forest in Sweden, I guess, than most parts of Europe, because we have a completely different forestry history. We can actually go back to the 40s with aerial photography. In the very south part of Sweden can reach back to the 30s. And I see many projects there using this series back to the 80s. And in Swedish terms, we can only reach so far with that. We can see that even before the 80s, we had quite a lot of logging going on, clear cutting actually. We need to go back to the 40s to find a forest landscape that, the open patches is mostly farmland here. And then later we start to get also forestry. And I happen to come from this place. This is my home village. So I know pretty much everything about this forest landscape, so that's also why I chose it. So when I was a kid, I was 9 years old in '84, I could walk around in these forests, and actually I did. I was like a free spirit as a child, and I was walking around a lot in these forests. And as you see today, we only had two like bigger patches of forest. And then you might say that, oh, well, you seem to have quite a lot of forest in Sweden, like you have two big patches already here. But, oh, sorry. If we zoom out a bit, we see that, oh, we happen to have quite big nature reserves in my home village. And this is the surrounding area. Like it's completely lacking protected forest. And of course, we have patches of forest in this landscape which are old, but they are rapidly disappearing. So it's not like we have very little left and we have actually protected that. It is, although there's almost nothing left, it's still logging, the logging is still going on. So it is, and this is what we are tracking also the logging. And I just wanted to show this. This is the image from the 40s, and the forest landscape, it was like a landscape of old growth forest. We had some selective logging that had been going on for about 100 years before this, from the 1850s, but it was never clear cutting, at least in northern part of Sweden, so they were selectively logged. The difference now is that the other part of the landscape, which has not been harvested once, it is usually planted with pine. And although we have had a cover of spruce forest or mixed stands, it is usually planted with pine. So this image is taken here, and this image is taken here. And the difference is quite staggering. And the thing is that when we look at photos taken from there, yeah, you can certainly see a difference between 1940s and today, but still there's quite a lot of, there's a forest cover. It's not like the forest is gone, it grows back again. And I will talk a little bit about what the problem is with these images that we are trying to interpret what is happening under here, what is happening to the species diversity when we log the forest and exchange it for something completely different. This is some images I took in Austria last weekend, and we have kind of the same thing going on, although it is very, very little left, I think, in Austria. Like in the very, very steepest part of the landscape and up close to the forest, like up to the mountains, we have something resembling old growth forest. As soon as you go a little bit farther down, it's just plantation everywhere. This is taken in Finland. I was in Finland 3 weeks ago. There was a river on one side, it was pristine forest with pine, on the other side, plantation. So we have this going on pretty much everywhere, but the extent of this part of the landscape, of course, varies a lot in countries in Europe. So what is the problem with these landscapes? The ones that on one hand is forestry, like based or dominated landscapes, and natural landscapes where we have some sort of natural variation going on. If we look at the stand level of natural disturbance in a natural landscape, we have dips in volume of trees at disturbance events. And they happen more or less randomly, depending on which disturbance agent is traveling to the landscape. When it comes to biodiversity, if we have a lot of disturbance event, of course, the old growth specialists, their populations, they will go down slightly and then they will bounce back again. If we have a really, really big disturbance, like a stand replacing disturbance event, like in Borneo Forest, we might have fire, then of course it will go down quite a lot, but it will bounce back. In the disturbance, in the landscape with forestry going on stand level, we will have growth up to a certain level when the age is, when the forest is ripe, and then we harvest it. and then we do it over and over again. And as more and more stands in this landscape have undergone this change, biodiversity will actually go down until it cannot bounce back again, because there will be no sources left for that biodiversity to spread from. So although we have some reserves in some parts of the landscape, they will be so wide apart so that the species, they cannot actually bounce back into, and we see this many times now. Actually, it's close to the coast and in the southern parts of Sweden, we see that the forest can look quite good. There can be quite a lot of dead wood and everything looks fine, but the species aren't there, which is highly problematic. And that's something we need to work on to make it possible for species to reappear in the landscape. A little bit about the methodology. As I said in the beginning, we are working with two sets of data, basically. We use Landsat only for change detection to do a retrospective analysis back to the 80s. But to reach farther back in time, we have to use historical aerial photos, which are really, really difficult to work with. They're not homogeneous in color or in, they're grayscale images with very little information, let's say. But we have a few different methodologies to work with these. We will soon introduce a new one. We can reach back to the 50s with these, and we have images back to the 40s. And as I can see, if I look through the archives, pretty much the entire continent of Europe has these sort of photos as well. So we have now started to work on Finland, doing the same thing there. So we have a group of people working on this there now to map Finland. We use some data from the Forest Agency. They can provide data back to the 2000s. We will probably go over to do this part ourselves, the continuous updating of the data to remove patches which has been logged. And we use a mask, of course, for the forest landscape so that we know that it is actually a forest landscape we are working on. The product we provide today comes in three parts. It's an information page. Here you have the web address. Web address. There is a map, and we have statistics. You can go in and look how much is harvested and how much is fine for logging of different kinds of forests. We don't stop just by finding the old forest in the landscape. We also classify the forest in the landscape in three different classes. So we have known high conservation values where we are 100% sure that these forests are actually have high conservation values. And those are usually woodland key habitats. We have formal protection, and we have other service from the authorities where we are absolutely sure that we have actually targeted the best patches in the landscape. We have one class in the middle called the probable conservation values. And in Sweden, we have something called the Species Information Center, which is a huge database with species finds with coordinates. So we take this whole database, and then we look at where these finds have been done in the landscape. So if someone has been here and found a lot of red listed species, we can assume that this forest is actually quite good for biodiversity. Otherwise, they would never find these species here. Because outside in this landscape where there's been clear cutting, we know that these species they don't exist there. They cannot bounce back that fast in this landscape. So that's like the middle class, and this is really good because this is something that is continuously growing as people are out doing inventories. This is a big thing in Sweden too. When I went out in Finland, I was talking to them about the forest inventories. It's not such a big thing there. They are more looking at structures, and it's very hard to report structures in any database. People usually don't. And there are no really good databases for it. We have a final class here, which is we don't know other than that we have classified it in the remote sensing survey. So we see that they are probably not clear-cut, at least back to the 50s. And in many times, actually, they are good. I will show you examples of that. These are just images of how this map service looks in different parts of the country. We have one frame here from the southern part of the country. We have my home county, that's the bottom here. I've done a lot of inventories here in the different parts of this landscape, working at the county district board in the past. Here's from Jämtland County. And as you see, it is a highly fragmented forest landscape with most of the forest being clear-cut before. On the web map, you cannot only see the patches of all forests left, you can also see the loggings, or actually these are the logging notifications. So we have old logging notifications that are more than 6 weeks old, and we have newer ones that are within 6 weeks time frame. And this is important because in Sweden, you file for a logging and you have 6 weeks until the authority has decided. But they actually don't decide anything. It is an automatic procedure. So they usually go through automatically. I could say that also that in Sweden, there are about 65,000 logging notifications every year. And out of these, we as volunteers doing environmental work, looking for species and actually doing something to survey these before logging, we can maybe manage a couple of hundred, maybe 1,000 a year at the most. So it is like a quite hopeless situation, and the authorities, they don't really do anything. They don't have any resources for it. So it's very problematic. These are executed loggings since the 2000s. So you see that this is like going on the whole time, and this is done after we created the data. So here it is. Yeah, there used to be an old forest here, but it's gone. We will extend this data now back to the 80s with data we have created, and in the future we will also add, of course, data going back to the 50s. And then, of course, everything that is around here, it will be this yellow executed loggings. Another nice thing, because we have this database, is that we can connect it to their database immediately. So you can search with a polygon when you've done, or anyone else has done a survey, and you can see which species have been found inside these forests. So this is a forest I inventoried quite many years ago now. And just for fun, I made a polygon around it to see which species were found there, and this seems to be the list. I can't recall seeing all of these, but I guess I did. And this can be done all over the country. Now, don't hear me wrong here. This doesn't mean that all of these patches have been surveyed. Some has and some haven't. So you cannot go anywhere and see what species are there. Only where people have been before. We of course do that data validation. This is a work going on as we speak here today. We do the surveys in 10,000 hectare landscapes. Out of these landscapes, we have maps on all forest in the landscape. We choose 1,000 hectares. I would say semi-randomly, because we choose the biggest first. And that's only because of logistic reasons, that if we would choose completely random, we would have a lot of these tiny patches to serve, and it would take forever. We have done this in a few frames already. We have another 4 up here that are surveyed now. And what we can see is that in these landscapes, And we look in southern part of Sweden, or about 25 to 35% is mapped as old forest. If we go further north, it is a little bit more. So this means that in a landscape with a survey of 10,000 hectares, about 32 or 44% is mapped as old forest. If we go into these old forests, like these 1,000 hectares we have chosen within the landscape and survey them, we see that in this western part of Sweden, 60 to 75% is actually, it reaches the target for fauna protection, which means that if the county administrative board in these counties would go to the CPA, the Swedish Environment Protection Agency, and say that they want to protect it, they would have nothing against that because it reaches the target for conservation status. And this is of course good for our survey because we want to target these forests. And if we can make a map over the whole country showing where we have the highest risk of hitting these forests by harvesting in the old forest, we can actually make a risk map, like a risk. If you're up here, we know that we have much more forests with higher conservation values, but we don't know the percentage. But if we have this service done over the country, we can say, oh, well, if you're up here, there's actually an 8% chance or risk that you will harvest the forest with high conservation values. And then we can say that both to the customers and to the forestry company and to the authorities, which is very helpful. We don't have this today. So, yeah, this is probably what I already said, so let's skip that. I saw this map coming up a couple of times yesterday, and I just had to say something about it. I didn't yesterday, but I became a little bit irritated, let's say. I went to this database and had a look, and actually this is also found in the database. And this is actually coincide perfectly with how it actually looks in Sweden. We have quite a lot of old growth forest and pristine forest in Sweden. So please, if you show this again, use this one rather than this one. It makes a huge difference for the messages you give. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. These are examples of these unprotected potential primary forests we have in Sweden. This is an area I've been serving in 2017. All this you see here, this old growth forest, completely unprotected, and harvesting is going on in this landscape. Hopefully within a few years this will be protected, but up until now there are huge logging notifications in this landscape. Here's another example. This whole area up to here is completely unprotected, and much of this has high value, high conservation value, natural forest. There's one old clear cut here in the middle, but all the rest is. So every time we see a new logging notification in these areas, we know that this is an old growth forest. And the logging notifications in these areas, they are huge. They are hundreds of hectares usually at the time. And they leave very little consideration left after harvesting in these areas. In this forest, these kind of species that are usually quite hard to find in the rest of the forest landscape, they are found everywhere. Like this species, Scylopithecus odora, which is quite a rare species. I saw it on one image yesterday from Romania. This one you will never find it in a previously harvested area. It is completely impossible. This one is found almost everywhere in these old growth forests. They are quite common. And of course, these bird species, they are everywhere. So all these red listed species, which are almost gone in the landscape, they are very common in these old forests. And they actually reflect what we have lost in our forest landscape. And I'm guessing that these kind of species, at least in the parts of Europe where we have coniferous forest, these species have been quite common. Maybe not the Siberian jay, but the rest of these. And they are just gone. I made 2 reports from these old growth forest surveys we have done. We have done 4 of these. The other 2 surveys will be presented in a report that will be published before Christmas this year. It is really, really big landscapes. We have been many people surveying species, and some parts of them are actually being formally protected, but some are still open for harvesting. I've done a couple of analysis on our data, a connectivity analysis of the entire country. These are, I think these sort of maps are quite good for the understanding of like the extent and the size of these sorts of forest landscapes that we have here. I was looking now just before I went here, this country we are in now, Hungary, it is a little bit smaller than this country. And the size of these forest landscapes that are still here, they are huge. They are extremely large. So this is the current situation. If we fail to protect the forests that are not yet protected here, we will have something looking like this. You see the change in connectivity. It is quite amazing. And we have shown these kind of maps, I think, many times at different meetings, and it is unprecedented in the EU. And it doesn't stop here, of course. It reaches over to Finland as well, and over to Russia, and it bends out here in Norway as well. So it is this huge map.
Great.
And this is a picture of that. This is like a more simple analysis. It's just a moving window analysis of all the old growth forests, both protected and unprotected, that are found now. And here is if you take away all the unprotected areas, you see the difference. So here's something we need to protect. This is super valuable. I did another type of analysis. This is in southern Sweden. We have some form of protection, but the landscape is completely like depleted of all forests. It's just a lot of plantations, all of it. So there's very little to work on here. If we want to build a green infrastructure out of this, where to begin? I mean, there's anything to build on, really. Apart from these little patches of old forest. We have, though, a wetland survey, so we can see where we have high quality wetlands. And there are also surveys made on the waterways, so we can know exactly where in the landscape we have really high conservation value waterways. If we were to add a buffer of forest, it can be whatever. I mean, it can be a plantation or something right now, but if we added buffers around, because in Sweden we don't have any rules against doing logging close to waterways. They do it to the edge, always, almost. So if we were
2
to,
minutes is okay?
huh?
2 more minutes?
It's just, this is the last.
The last.
It is the last. So if we were to add a buffer around these mires, wetlands, and waterways, we could build an infrastructure out of that. And the thing is that we know that forests close to waters and close to wetlands, they actually have higher potential to build up higher conservation value. It goes faster than it does in upland. This has been studied a couple of times, so we know that. So this is like a simple way to target the forest landscape for green infrastructure. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an amazing work that you're doing, Jan, really, you and your organization.